last year, so which was last May. So a tiny bit about me. I think you've sort of got my bio and everything. So a lot of things that tick the same boxes as you. So I work as a coach. I'm a coach supervisor. I do team coaching, and for my doctorate, I did some team coaching research, which was what I shared with you last May. And at the end of that, I did a little teaser and said, I'm just starting out on some new research. And at the end of that session, Paul dived in and said, well, can you come back in a year and let us know the findings from that? So that's why I am. And I think I said in at the end of that, like Yoda said, I will be back, and I am back in less than a year. So it's great to be back with you. So in terms of today's session, let me just talk a bit about what I was planning to do. Going to give you a bit of a background to my recent team coaching research to contextualize that for you, and really talk about what led me to do further research, having said that was it. That seems to be a bit of a pattern for me. I say that's it, really, no more, enough pain. And then I somehow find myself doing something else. And I see a few of you smiling. So I wonder if you run the same pattern. So tell you a bit about that. My curiosity that became a bit more of an itch, and I decided I really did need to have a good scratch at that. I'm going to go through the key findings. So this is based on a paper that will be published in August of this year. So I'm giving you a bit of a heads up as to what's come out of that. And obviously it's not as in depth, but I'm really going to give you the sort of key insights from that. And then we've got some time in the end. So I think what we'll do today is we're reasonably, sort of contained number. We might just open that up for some personal reflections and that, rather than do breakout sessions, and just have a bit of a discussion of kind of what's landed for you in all of this. So does that, you can give me a quick thumbs up. Does that sound okay for everybody? Good, great. So you might be familiar with this. It's a bit busy, so don't worry if you can't read it all. But this is the model. I just want to contextualize it, so I'm not going to go through it in any detail. But this was the model that came out of my team coaching research and my initial research for my doctorate. And what really came out of that for me was there was no really one size fits all to do team coaching, but there were sort of key ingredients that came through. And interestingly, I think Paul and I were sort of on parallel paths at the same time, because he was doing his work around the sort of the 3 Ps and the 4 Ps at that time. And we've both come to a sort of a similar junction, which is there are different ways in which to do team coaching. And essentially, there is a preparation phase, which involves things like, are we going to work with another coach? How are we going to gather information for this? Who we're going to talk to, how many sessions, all of that sort of thing. But also this container session which is very much the intervention. So when we are doing the actual work. And then the evaluation stage, where we sort of take stock of the work, not only evaluating how successful that's been for our actual client, but also how we think that's gone ourselves, including any work that might happen with a co-coach. So the bit I want to zone in a bit more is this middle section. And that's very much around creating this container. I know Paul uses similar terminology around that, of safety and growth. So people feel that they can trust as much as they can share things, they can perhaps be a bit more vulnerable, but that there's also challenge around that. And one of the major things that I think came out of my previous research was that there are actually a number of roles that we play as a coach, and they're bona fide roles. We're not just team coaching all the time. We do move into other roles. And roles that people said, actually, yes, those are roles I recognise to a larger or lesser extent, were the roles of being a facilitator at times, of perhaps needing to be the mentor or the expert, share a model, a bit of knowledge around something, the teacher or the trainer piece, and sometimes the referee, the person that's sort of, you're looking after some of the dynamics. And we talked about how much or how little of each of those roles we do. But the thing that was really interesting with these roles at the bottom, which were around projection and transference. So being pulled perhaps into a role of critical parent or nurturing parent, and also group contagion. And some of the people that I spoke to previously were really frank about, you know what, I used to be a leader of a big team. I actually quite like it when I'm in a team, particularly if the team leader themselves is a bit weak and there's a bit of a vacancy. I can find myself not exactly even being invited in. I sometimes find I'm just kind of I'm there because I've enjoyed that. Or I really miss being part of a team, and sometimes I can get too close to this. So roles which are more around group contagion. And one or two of my previous participants talked quite a lot about their own backgrounds and understanding not only corporately what they'd done, but some of the drivers from their own family of being, only child or the eldest child, or roles that they'd assumed. And it piqued my curiosity that I did my supervision training with a company called the CSA that some of you may have heard of. And one of the mantras of the CSA is who we are is how we coach, who we are is how we supervise. So I really started to get even more curious around, well, how does our own background really contribute to that? And as those of us who have done any research or have published papers, one of the things you always do at the end is say the limitations of your work, and you always do some recommendations for what somebody else could do. So I said it'd be really interesting for somebody to pick up this and have a look at how family of origin affects us as a team coach. And then a little while later, I thought, well, why don't I do it? So that's how we got to today. That's kind of the potted history as to how we got to where I am today. So, what was my research focus and design? Well, I had quite a broad question. I just said, how does the coach's family of origin impact on them and their work when they're team coaching? So, I was just interested, not just in a not so good way, but what are some of the good things around that come out of that, and how can we make those links? I did a single case study. So I had a number of um, coaches, and I'll talk about those in a second. There were 17 of them in total. And we went through this as a case. My research participants, I always refer to them as being like other me's. So they were I see Kathy's laughing. That is perhaps a bit scary, but they were all, experienced people. They'd all done at least 10 years worth of executive coaching. They were all employed, so sole practitioners or in small coaching businesses rather than in organizations. They had a range of philosophical influences, so Gestalt, TA was certainly two of the ones that people were very steeped in. Jungian type, systemic thinking. I had a couple of very well-known constellations people, for want of a better expression, and somatics. So levels of experience of team coaching and qualifications. So they all had done a reasonable amount. Some had done a huge amount. Several of them had done qualifications as well. And I would say probably 3/4 of them were accredited coaching supervisors as well. So there was a lot of knowledge in the room. I sent participants a copy of the Ancona and Perkins article, which I think was emailed to you in advance. So some of you might have read that. Alison, actually, who's on the call, had shared that with me, and then a couple of other people did subsequently. So it seemed to be out there in the ether, and I sent that as pre-reading. And I had in-depth interviews with everybody, followed by 2 focus groups. So I did one online because I had some people based in Asia Pacific and other parts of in the States who couldn't make one face to face and one face to face. And that the focus groups were predominantly based on let's just share the findings, but also and what can we do about it? Because one of the things I was very curious about is we were all, for want of a better expression, pretty experienced coaches. And we were well aware that a lot of people are going into team coaching in particular, having just, bridging over from coaching without perhaps much knowledge, many qualifications or any robust program they've gone through, which has really looked at some of these factors in more detail. So we were kind of interested in what are the implications of this for people who perhaps haven't gone through a similar route to ourselves. Does that make sense as a line of inquiry? Yeah, great. So if you haven't had a chance to read the article, or even if you have a bit of refresh on that, so the six elements that Akona and Perkin looked at were our values and beliefs, the roles that we play in our family, something they referred to as secrets, triangles, expectations and mastery, and boundaries. So the high level findings, if I start off there and then I'm just going to go through each one. I've got some quotes for each one, which hopefully will just sort of bring it to life a little bit more. All six elements were definitely relevant for team coaching. I guess something I haven't said as a start of this, and Conan Perkins' article looked at leaders in organisations, and there has been some research done on family of origin and leaders, and also as individual coaches. But where I found there was a real gap was looking at team coaches in particular. And I was quite intrigued by the one of the articles I read, which was that actually our family of origin is our first experience of being in some form of a team. And so what's the implications of that for when we actually join another team, albeit in a temporary role as a team coach? So that was sort of the gap that I was interested in. So all six elements came across as being relevant, but values and roles were at the heart of everything. They make an impact on everything. And everybody I spoke to could make very obvious, I put in inverted commas, links. So, I was brought up with this as a key value. I now see this in my work. This was a role I assumed in the family. I now see this in the work. So there were definite links there. There was definitely overlap between values, roles, expectations, and boundaries. And at times we were trying to put them in different buckets and thinking, actually, is that a value? Was I the responsible one in the family? Or was it that responsibility was a key value and we all sort of assumed it? There was a lot of that going over. And was there an expectation that we would all be responsible? So at times it was a bit difficult to put those into very separate categories. Secrets and triangles was, I think, fascinating because there were various levels of significance. Some were like, no, I don't really remember anything about secrets. Others were, I didn't uncover some big secrets, but some big secrets were shared with me and the impact of this. And one of the things that perhaps is important to say now is that everybody who I interviewed as part of this was happy. They've all got pseudonyms which they chose, and they were very happy for me to share all of it. But people shared some pretty, important and very, very deep information, particularly around secrets, not all of which I'm sharing. Um, so secrets, but when secrets and triangles had been present, they really did have an impact. So that was sort of varying degrees, but there was some interesting information that came out of that. So I put this together just to try and put into a diagram sort of the significance. And you can see I've got in the heart of the model values and roles, because those were the two things that really came up as driving things. So the values, the how to treat people, how to behave, how to do things, but values are what I'm calling our place in the family. I'll talk about this in a moment, and either adopted or assigned roles.
That's it.
Um, and then we've got on the outskirts, we've got triangles, we've got secrets, we've got boundaries, and we've got expectations. So various levels of significance of those, but the heart is definitely there for everybody. Are we okay so far? We've got to put thumbs up, yeah. So let's have a look at findings. What I'm going to do for each one, I'm just going to zone in on it a bit more, and I'm just going to give a bit more context around each of the six. So roles really split into two parts. What I'm calling our place in the family. So that was like eldest, youngest, and that sort of thing. And whether we had roles that were assigned to us or roles that we assumed or adopted. So place in the family was was an interesting one for me. I'm going to use this word interesting a lot because I did find it, coming from my own family background, I did find it fascinating when I started to look at other people's family. So I expected the first three. I expected that there would be the oldest child. Um, and that came across as somebody who was the eldest, often a role model, often a quasi parent. So I had one or two people who had younger siblings, even slightly ill siblings they looked after and cared for, and as such became felt as if they'd become an adult at quite a young age. The middle child with at least one older or younger sibling was another one. The younger child, sometimes the miracle child that came quite a lot later. I had one guy who referred to himself as golden balls. He couldn't do a thing wrong. He came quite a long time later on. There was a miscarriage between him and his elder brother, and he said, I could get away with murder, but my brother never could. So quite interesting. One younger child who said, a female who said, I know I was the last attempt at a boy, and I was a big disappointment because I wasn't a boy. But then there was some more interesting, slightly more unusual, not interesting. The only child and a single parent. So no siblings or a quasi only child because they had much younger or older siblings and they'd been brought up by one parent. And that was quite a significant element that came out. The only girl with at least one other male sibling who was treated differently to them, and an adopted child. So something that I was really interested in, fascinated in, curious in from the start in putting it out there and asking for people who are interested in the research. I had no idea about what people would bring with them, and from 17 people to have quite a broad mix like that. I thought. Right from the start, I thought that was really quite fascinating. So there's our place in the family, our order, who's around us, all that sort of thing. But the other thing was the assigned or the adopted roles that people played, which either had or certainly didn't have anything to do with our place in the family. So the responsible one, the person who took responsibility from a very young age, somebody who's good at being a fixer, a troubleshooter, a problem solver, and still sees, that's the role I still play in the family. If there's a big family conference about something, I'm the one that picks it up and works with it. The mediator, the conflict avoider, the smoother, the peacekeeper, somebody where there was a lot of interesting dynamics and that tension in the room, and they were the person that sort of stepped in and looked after that. The self-sufficient or independent one, particularly where there were siblings who were perhaps more demanding of time. And then you can see from sort of the TA drivers, referred to as please others, the try hard, and then the idea of being the helper in the family. Those were the key ones. There were others, but those were the ones where typically two or three had mentioned that as a role. And the interesting thing with roles is that everybody saw them as being useful. They all had their plus sides. Being the responsible was good, but they could all see how that role could be overplayed. And I asked people particularly for links between the role and any that they saw when they were team coaching. So this is a bit busy, so I'll just let you read it. But Sarah talked about responsibility and Mary talked about the peacekeeper. Can everybody read it, or does anybody need me to read it out? No, you're all okay. I'll just give you a moment to read that for yourself. Can you give me a thumbs up if you finish reading? Yeah, is everybody there? So for each of the values, I had several of those where people could see where I talk a lot in my work about where do we set the volume dial. And we could see with that where people go, yeah, I have the responsibility, but when it's overplayed, and I do see that when I'm working with the team, that's what happens. So people were able to sort of make those links quite nicely. So that was roles, and then there's values, and there's a lot of oh, sorry, another thing I didn't say about roles, and there were connections between place in the family and roles that people assumed or were assigned. So an obvious pattern is was the eldest child was often the one who took responsibility, but a really interesting pattern around the middle child who often saw themselves as being very good at being like the mediator. So I had one person, and you know how quotes stay with you, and she said, I said, can you give me an example of that? She said, well, we might be just at the end of a session and somebody will say, should we go out for dinner? And we'll go, yeah. And somebody said, well, we could go to the Chinese. And somebody else might say, well, we could go for an Indian. What do you think? And she said, I'll say things like, well, the Chinese is 5 miles down the road and the Indian is 8 miles down the road. And she said, I realize I have a pattern of just giving a bit more information, but I sit on the fence. Or when people want my opinion, I'm often quite, I'm quite sort of almost like reluctant to give that. She's great at this kind of mediator, seeing both sides of the story. She said, but sometimes people just want my opinion. And I can find that quite hard because I spent a lifetime trying to keep out of the way of two very, very bossy and lively sisters. So let's have a look at values. These are the key values that came up. They're a bit busy. I'll just read out the other things. To be a law-abiding citizen. So, the roles you follow them, don't misbehave, respecting elders or adults. You might recognize some of these for yourself. Doing the right thing, so don't curry favor, have a strong moral compass, those sorts of things. Excellence. If you're going to do something, do it well. And the key, one of the interesting things is, of course, when you're doing research, you sort of really notice your own, don't you? And I was like, yeah, okay, do the best you possibly can. Honesty, be truthful, be honest, act with integrity. Fairness, strong ingrained sense of what's fair and just. Loyalty, put the family unit first. One of my participants said, I'm actually sitting here feeling quite uncomfortable talking about this because it feels disloyal to the family, even though I know they wouldn't care, kind of thing. But it was, that honor and commitments. If you say you're going to do something, do it. Don't let other people down. Be polite and considerate, and put other people first. So very, very strong sort of values there. And again, people said they're good. Those things are good. They are things that have helped me in life. They've provided a good moral compass for me. They've been very, very useful. But when they're overplayed in a team coaching session, they can get in the way. So again, I've got some quotes for you for be a law-abiding citizen, honouring commitments, and being polite and considerate. And again, I'll just let you read those. Can you give me a thumbs up when you're done? Yeah, all pretty much done. And that's that those are just three that I've put there, but again there were many examples of when people could quite readily give examples. And again, I think one of the interesting thing when you're doing your own research, you notice your own patterns. So Bernard's were quite I have that get very disappointed when people haven't done what they said they're going to do, because in my world that's what you do, but that isn't always the same. So that was there was some useful reflections for myself along the way. So those are the two I'm going to do in a bit of a meaty session, because those were really at the heart of it. But I'm just going to give you an insight to what people said about triangles, alliances, and cliques. We're going to have a look at those. Maybe if I just go back to that. So the interesting thing is, so triangles. If you sort of know about family systems theory, the triangle is a key concept because it's the smallest stable relationship, and where tension can shift, but in focus between the sort of the three relationships, and can contain the tension without needing to involve anybody else. This idea of we kind of move around it. And so I was interested if people had experience of being in triangles. So, like mother, father, and them, or them with them, their siblings in their family of origin. And if so, how that they saw that impacting. And people came up with examples of of stuff in their family background, but there was nobody really that could say, and I know that's how I sometimes find it now. But what did happen? So it felt a bit forced. It felt a bit forced to say, I was always in a triangle with my two siblings, and now this happens in team coaching. That was definitely forced. But what did come out was the power of triangles in team coaching sessions. The thing that people obviously talked about, most people were very familiar with TA, was this idea of the Cartman drama triangle and how we can be impacted on that. So Gigi talked about this idea of being invited in to be the savior or the rescuer, being overprotective of the team, wanting to help them in this big bad corporate world that they found themselves. Um, and that and Guy said, the rescue is not my actual position. Sometimes I'm more the persecutor because I can get a bit fed up with them and the poor me, and feel as if I'm sometimes overcompensating to that. Another of my participants talked about how sometimes she can feel like the victim, particularly if she's been brought in through a third party and she isn't privileged to some of the information. Perhaps she's not being paid for as much work as she could do. And she said, I can sort of find myself slipping into that role as well. The Cartman drama triangle was something that we explored in terms of understanding the dynamics of that, and also in a way that isn't as obvious, of course, in individual coaching, is it? Because typically, although we might have other stakeholders, there are the two of us in the room rather than these other dynamics. But we also had talks about other experience of triangles and clicks. So certainly one I've come across where I'm the team coach, there's HR, and there's a team leader, and there's a dynamic, there's a triangle between those three going on. Or the team coach, one team member, and the team. And again, people gave examples of that where perhaps they've been challenged by a team member and the rest of the team have been silent. So it's almost like this silent other in there, and how those dynamics have played out. Or the team coach and two team members. So I was drawn into that. So again, I remember a couple of examples of people saying there was a very vocal person here, very vocal person here, and I was here, and it felt like this dynamic going on between the three of them. Or just noticing cliques in teams, so their own threes or the dynamics within them. So what I really came out of that for me is kind of it's a bit forced, saying I was always in a triangle here, and this is what happens here. But triangles are really important for us to understand the dynamics of, and not just the Cartman drama triangle, but how those dynamics might sort of move in a different way in the team coaching session. Secrets. That was an interesting one. And if you've read the article I sent out, the article tended to talk about things like secrets that are held in the family. The fact that X has got a bit of a drink problem, or there was a bit of financial issue over the past, or Y went to prison for a time, they just disappeared, and those kinds of secrets in a family. And so the concept of harboring secrets or taboo subjects is very core in family systems. So we can go back to the work of Virginia Satir or Bowen, etc. What really came out in my research is if an individual participant, so in this case us as a team coach, has been subject of a family secret, then it a big family secret, it does have an enduring impact on us and our work. And I had I had more than three. I'm going to share three with you, but I had a number of people who volunteered secrets, and how they personally impacted on them when they met with other secrets or privileged secret information in a team coaching session. So secrets was quite a broad subject. It was the experience of being the subject of a secret and how that then impacts on me, but also the team coach as a keeper of secrets. I'll talk about that in a moment. Undiscussables or unsaids, and how much disclosure is good. So there was quite a lot of additional information that sort of sat behind on that. So I had three people who I just briefly want to talk about. I had one person who's called herself Gigi. She was adopted but didn't know about it until she was getting on for a teenager, and a family member, a threat, as she said, a mad aunt threatened to tell me unless my parents told me. So she found out like that. Somebody called Joy. Joy doesn't know who her father is. It's never been mentioned. And now is very much, I don't even really want to know who he is. I'm not interested anymore because he's never been, the book has never been involved in my life, were her words. And that's kind of that. And Tia herself was a secret. So she was the child of a relationship between her mother, who was unmarried, and her father, who was married, and a long enduring love affair, as she referred to it. Her father's wife never found out about it, and when she died, his side of the family eventually found out about it. So she was a well-kept secret for many, many years. And I'll just put them up there. I think they're very powerful. I'll just let you read them. They all say the impact that secret, being the actual secret itself, had on them. Can you give me a thumbs up when you're there? I know they're quite wordy. Yeah, I didn't want to cut them down too much. They're powerful, aren't they? Um, and I was sitting there not knowing this, and people telling me this, and thinking, gosh, some really powerful, but interesting are the different ways in which people reacted to that. And what you don't have there, of course, is the tonality of how people said things, and that which was incredibly powerful. But not everybody was a secret. Some people just sort of said, that no, I don't have really any experience of that. People also, the participants also often didn't like the word secrets. They felt it was quite a sort of a pejorative term. It was too strong, and it wasn't a natural fit for the business world. This idea of it's a secret kind of thing. Um, so we talked about different language. We talked about our role as a team coach, as a keeper of secrets, and of course, what happens when we're doing our initial um, um, exploratory work and talking to people, and people tell us things and say, but I don't want that sharing with the rest of the group, or I'll tell you this in confident, or the team leader telling us things. There's going to be some redundancies coming up, but people don't know. So where do we sit within that? We've already heard how Gigi's around that. We've already heard how Tia was around that. Tia was like, I put a marker and I say, yeah, that's privileged information. But how do we react when we are told things and then said, but I don't want that sharing? The undiscussables and the unsaid. So that Thornton talks about this idea of it being an undiscussable, doesn't it? It's kind of the elephant in the room. But equally, other people said it's fascinating what comes out in a team session when somebody will say something and then somebody might say, Mark, I've worked together for 5 years and I've never known that about you. And that happens all the time, doesn't it? I was fascinated myself. I've been part of a supervision group probably for about 7 years. One of the people that I interviewed as part of this told me more in the first 5 minutes about her than I've known in all the time that we've been in a supervision group. And it's not that we haven't chatted, it's not that we haven't had conversations, but two really cool things about her I did not know. And it's just like, blimey, that's just never ever come up. So there's sorts of all sorts of unsaid. And then also we talked about ourselves and how much disclosure is good. So obviously, a lot of this work, this idea of family of origins has its origins itself, doesn't it, in therapy work, where often, that whole mantra is we don't really share that much about ourselves, but what about in the team coaching session? Are we sharing more information about ourselves, who we are, what makes us tick, or do we not? Do we try to come across as a bit more of a blank canvas? And there were a couple of people I was interviewing saying I struggle sometimes with that balance of how much do I share, how much do I hold back. So how much disclosure is good? So I came away that this is a fascinating topic. I'm not sure the word secrets is kind of right. There's information out there. There's information that's shared, that's known, that's common. There's information that's just given to us, and we have to navigate our way through it. But this overriding thing as well, that if people had had experience and not so great experiences of secrets, our reactions to that are quite, they're quite deep wired. I've got two more that I'm going to look at very, very light touch because I want to open it up for some chat in a second. So we had boundaries and then expectations to succeed in life. I'm not going to say much about boundaries. Boundaries really came to whether there were clear rules and established practices in my family. So did I grow up with very clear boundaries around things like meal times, what we did, structure, and all those sorts of things? And also, did I grow up in quite a structured kind of environment or a bit more of a chaotic kind of environment, and how that might have impacted on me? And again, I've got a couple of sorry, I've gone the wrong way. No, that's it. That's it. So I'm not going to give you any quotes on that. So, but there were some interesting quotes, but I don't think there's anything that's kind of rocket science to look at today. And then the final one, sorry, I want to just share with you is expectations to succeed in life. And I was particularly interested because my participants were all what I would say successful people. They'd had the vast majority had had big corporate jobs. They'd come into coaching later on. They were working with some big clients, etc. And so I was quite. I was interested, for want of a better word, of knowing where did that come from, and that and that was quite different. So I had a number who were really quite they came right from the start. So here's Mary. I'll just let you read about Mary. Can you give me a thumbs up on that one? Yeah, yeah. Now Mary, I know I'm in a supervision group with Mary, and I certainly didn't know the Cambridge thing, but when you hear something, you go, oh, okay, yeah, I understand now. I understand. I understand now. But then Gigi was quite different. Gigi was adopted. And I guess we can get into a bit of a nature nurture debate around that whole thing. And really, what came out of it was no real clear pattern. Some people were like really high expectations in the family, and I've gone with that. Others were I've rebelled a bit. Others were there were really no low there were no real expectations for me. My participant who referred to himself as Golden Balls said, I remember when I got my degree and I got a 2-1 and my dad said to me, did you pass? He said the expectations were so low for me. I could have just done anything. And that, but he'd sort of made his own way in life. So there wasn't really as sort of, as clear cut patterns there. Okay, we're not going to go into breakout rooms, but we've got about 15 minutes left. So I'm just going to open it up for thoughts, reactions, maybe anything that's popped up for yourself that you're happy to share, and really pass it over. I'm curious to know kind of what's landed and yeah. And if you can either just give it a little wave. Yeah, Kathy, you've come off mute. I think that's usually the first sign, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, Jill, I was very keen to do this session. I'm so glad because it just gives me, I'm the third eldest of 12 children. And so the
Right.
dynamics of all, yes, yes. So the dynamics have always
12.
been pretty crazy, but also, and I'm being very open here, but I'm just fascinated by it. I actually got pregnant when I was 20 and had an adoption. So I'm a birth mother. I'm not adopted, I'm a birth mother. And my
Right.
daughter has just come back into my life. So it's but it's interesting now all the family dynamics with that happening. It's fascinating. So that's why thank you. I've got a lot of aha moments, obviously.
Yes, 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 yeah. And I think it's like serendipity, isn't it? A good friend of mine, who literally lives down the road. She's quite a bit older than me. We moved full time here about a year ago, and I went to see her a few months ago, and she said, "I've got something to tell you." And I thought she was going to tell me she got a terminal illness. She couldn't speak, she couldn't say, and it was that she'd had a child when she was 20 who
There you
who'd been
go.
adopted, and she'd been told to tell nobody about it. And what fascinated me, and the child who's now 60 had come back into her life. Absolutely fascinating, Kathy. And what interested in me really, well, fascinated me really, was she couldn't get the words out. And she said, I don't know why I can't speak about it. And I said, well, is it
Yeah.
so surprising when you've been told not to talk about it for 40 years?
Mm.
Yes. So, yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Kathy. Yeah.
No, thank
Where were
you.
you when I was doing the research? You'd have been, oh, we need to widen it, don't we? I feel another category coming on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Who else? Was there anything there that surprised you, or any aha moments of your own?
Jill, I was just thinking, I was more interested in, the terminology, as you said, around secrets and how you
Yeah.
reconcile that with confidentiality, as a team
Mm.
coach. So how are you thinking about that?
Well, yeah, and I think that is such a fascinating thing, isn't it? Because you know, I I'm certainly not in a place where, everything has to be in open in the team, because I don't think that can be the case. I think if we're working with a leader, and again we're back into, then are we coaching the team leader again? We will have privileged information, don't we? I actually liked Tia's approach. And Tia is very, very well known in the constellations field. So I really liked it, but she said, I put a marker there and I say, that's the secret. So it's in the room and I'm aware of it, but I've sort of put the marker there. And that's something I've sort of been playing with. And that, so, but I think it is, and I know I'm sitting on the fence here, but I do think there's that really interesting piece, isn't there, about when we're having those initial scoping one-to-ones with people. If people tell us stuff that
Mm.
they then don't want to go into, it's a real challenge, isn't it? And I
Mm.
don't think there's a simple answer for that, other than encouraging people. I often use the analogy of an issues table with a team. Are people familiar with that? So if we
No.
think of it, if we think of a table, if I'm looking at my desk here, we have issues one, and issues one are things that are on the table that everybody knows about and we're working on. And that's usually stuff, it's budgets, it's the forecast, it's kind of that stuff that needs doing. Issues two is like the mess that's over here on my desk, which is I ever so often shuffle it. I might do a bit on it. So some people know about it. We're making a in fact, everybody knows about it. We're making a bit of progress, but we're not really dealing with it as a team. And then issues three is the stuff that's under the table. And that's some of the undiscussables, the unsaid, who doesn't like who, some of the dynamic. Some of it's a bit pongy and whiffy. It's been there for quite a long time, and it's not going away on its own. So with teams, and a lot of that is the undiscussable. So I'll often use that analogy and talk about how can we get as much of the two onto the one, but also how can we get as much of the three onto the table. So it's not
Mm.
necessarily secrets. It's just it's stuff that's there and those dynamics. And often I found if you have something like that as a framework, people can get that and go, oh yeah, okay, well we have a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, love,
And that so
love it.
so it's about surfacing some of that. But I don't think there are any easy answers, are there, Susie?
Mm.
It's tricky. And if we don't have those initial conversations up front, there's so much of that being getting burnt on our bum when we actually move into the team coaching sessions because we just don't have a lot of the context, do we? So
Exactly. No,
yeah,
it's
I'm
lovely. That's a lovely
yeah,
brand.
I'm curious if anybody's got any other insights around that.
Mm.
Kylie, are you come off mute? That looks. Are you coming off mute?
No, but I can.
Yeah, no, please do.
I was
If I see the arm going forward, I always assume that's a going off
I was
mute. So
just
it's like
writing.
mirror signal maneuver. So I thought I'd just help you out and get you straight in there. Yeah.
I'm very, very new to team coaching. I've done a lot of
Yeah.
one-on-one coaching. But one thing that occurred to me, of course, is, and it's an obvious one, isn't it, that as a team coach, we have these, how our family has impacted on us across those 6 areas. But of
Yeah.
course, everybody in the room is the same. And
Yeah.
so it's so complex, isn't it? And how
Yes.
this idea in health, we talk a lot about these shared values.
Mm.
And so what I'm wondering is, I've had people say, well, that they're not really my values.
Mm.
They're imposed on me, but we say, well, if you work in this organization, okay, something like honesty, that we usually find there are other behaviors close to their heart that might fit under that.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question, I think, well, the two things are just to notice the complexity of it all and how to bring a team to have a shared sense of value,
Yeah.
values that they work towards. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, and even more so, if we think about quite a common practice now of working with a co-coach, and people will often say to me, I choose to work with somebody who's very different to me. So I might choose to work with Kylie because Kylie is very X and I'm very Y. Well, that's probably then underpinned by some quite different things, isn't it? So we've got that coming into a relational space with a team, whereas you say you've got 8 people, 10 people who might call themselves a team, but they've got all their own. I like the idea in the constellations world. You may well have come across this before that everybody's got their peacock tail with their
Yeah.
peacock feathers in. Yes. So your peacock feathers are, all the stuff. So your qualifications, your school, your mentor, your coach before. And it's this idea we all sit there with our peacock tails, and what we see is so I see you. This is a very nice analogy for you. I see you, Carly and I, we're looking at each other, but we've both got our peacock tails behind us, which carries all of this information. And so we then bring that into a team session, 2 coaches. It's a lot, isn't it? And one of the things that really stood out for me was that one of in the focus groups we talked about, so what can we do about this, knowing it is very much present and aware. What can we do about it? And one of the things that really came out very strongly is I said that the majority of my participants were qualified coaching supervisors. And they said, actually, I've become so much more aware of all of this, and the dynamics and how they affect me through my supervision training. So, I think that's an interesting one, isn't it, for anybody who's just making a bridge over from individual coaching without having done any team coaching, additional sort of CPD, for want of a better expression, or done any supervision qualifications, that actually what just aren't we aware of? And that was a very, very strong theme that we were able to identify this because we have thought about some of this. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes,
Jessie.
Jessie. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was morning breakfast time, so I had to jumping in and out. So apologize if it's already covered. I'm curious about when you see family role patterns play out in the team, how do you work with that in the room? Or like how do you decide how explicitly do you maybe naming that, letting it surface, or kind of versus working with it more indirectly
Yeah.
when you're working as a team?
Yeah, I think in the room it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's sort of, almost like where did that sort of come from? So I suppose there's a couple of things for me. If I was coaching that individual, I think sometimes one of the arguments for doing coaching alongside team coaching is you see what people are like in the team setting, don't you? Which if you're only ever doing individual coaching with them, you don't see that. So that is a favourable argument. So I have had situations where I've been able to talk about that in an individual session with somebody, particularly the leader, as to dynamics that I've seen played out and where they might come from, and that kind of thing. I think in an actual team session, I'm trying to think, and I can't think of an example where I've gone beyond almost like the behavior to where what might be driving that. But I have done things around naming what I'm seeing and the impact and that kind of thing. But with my individual coaching clients, I have explored this quite a lot. And I've got one coaching client who's been through some very difficult family stuff, and she said actually just realizing, and she's the only girl in a family with four brothers, and just understanding the dynamics and that has just kind of helped her there. So kind of a bitty answer, but hopefully that's some of that's
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting. Actually, that only girl, because that would make me reflect. Even, I'm coming from the Chinese generation where we have the one child policy. So
yes,
it's almost like a whole generation of only
yes,
child, but actually
yes,
being the only girl, you're also carrying a very different expectation because
you
boys
are
are
right.
preferred. So I think what you
Yes,
said, not necessarily related to team coaching, but I'm coaching, a lot of really highly successful Chinese women, for example, and the
yes,
expectation has to be met, and what do they need to adapt in order to belong in that family system
yes,
also have huge
that's
impact on how they lead. Just a reflection. I think it's also,
yeah,
for me as a coach, I sometimes tend to also, what is expected of me. So also for something for me to reflect on. But thank
yeah.
you. Yeah, thank you for sharing
Yeah,
the
because it could
research.
be very easy to jump to we can be anything we want to be, but actually, if I've got this whole legacy which said I was a disappointment from the start, I should have been a boy, kind of thing. That we need to understand that, don't we? And again, from the male perspective of being the prince, for, as the boy, and doted on, then that's quite interesting in the organizational perspective, then, isn't it? We're probably out of time, aren't we, Susie? So we probably need to wrap up.
We do, Jill, but thank you. I feel like we could talk to you for hours about this. We're just scratching the surface, aren't we? But thank you so much for sharing that
Thank you.
research. And we will definitely love to read the article when it's done as well.
Yes, it should be. It'll be out in the August edition of the International Journal of Evidence-Based Coaching and Mentoring. So yeah, so I'll give you a heads up, Susie. So when it's out, it's in the production line, that bit now. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining again. Lovely to see you all. and take care, everybody. Go well.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
Susie. Thanks,
everybody.
Jill. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.